It's kind of like fast food. We call it slop or, AI slop. I think it's very real. The world is in danger of having less and less great things exist in it. Our mission is to see more great things exist in the world, and generative AI is both making that easier and harder.
Ignite your curiosity with Austin Next. I explore how ecosystems are built and how tech shapes the future. Austin is the frontier. It's where innovation takes root and new myths are made. Join What's Next. We're surrounded by an ever-growing creation tool set, generative AI, design platforms, open access to code, capital, and talent. But what we build with them is still a choice, greatness or slop. This episode is about that choice. And I'm joined by John Roescher, founder and CEO of Raw Materials, the design firm behind the public-facing strategies of Anduril, Saronic, and Meta. John makes the case that whether you're building software, hard tech, or even cities, design must be intentional and mission-driven to battle the forces of laziness, drift, and decay. John, welcome to Austin Next.
Nice to be here.
All right, I want to start off kind of at the top here. Tell me about Raw Materials and what exactly you guys do, what your whole industry does in that case, beyond just outsourcing design, which of course is not, I think, what you do.
Well, I don't know.
Oh,
Outsourcing
okay.
is kind of interesting. No, it's a good way to. It's a funny way to put it. No, so Raw Materials is a design company, and I think there's a little bit of a difference just in why we exist and what we're aiming to do, and that kind of leads to now today to how we're working with some of our clients. And so, Raw Materials is a design company, but we started this company, and it was started by myself, Pablo Marquez.
Well, I'm going to pause you because you just said it's a design company. So let's just even break that apart. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, well, so what we do is use design to make things, and I think that's we use design. We're creating a company where design and creativity is the product, and there's a lot of different ways for that to manifest or to realize. Um, we're going to make our own things. We're going to help. We're going to put a lot of effort and energy into education, into community and culture of the design space. But one way that we can use design to make things and see great things exist in the world, and we'll talk about why later, is working with other companies who need things designed and who, for different reasons, want to pay for some help in getting that done. The industry has a name that's existed for a long time. It's called an agency. And so one way that Raw Materials exists is as a design agency. So companies who need things designed or made, and they need to be designed for they can be made, would come to us and say, hey, we need this thing made. We need a brand. We need a piece of software. We need a piece of hardware. We need an ad campaign, whatever. And we need that thing designed. And we'd say, okay, well, we can do that for you. And here's how long it would take. And here's how much it costs. That's a pretty well-established industry. I mean, it's been around forever. It's called an agency. So we are an agency, and that's how most people know us. And that's how most of our work gets out into the world today. But Raw Materials is a design company. And so we're going to be finding lots of ways to do design and have that be commercialized, so that we can continue to do more designing.
I want to start with the agency for a minute because there's this interesting tension between things that are core to the company, things that are outsourced. Like let's take the, going and getting and helping someone with, just purely designing a logo, right? Obviously, I first, when I did the Austin Next podcast logo, we found somebody that could help us create it and do different things. But then you talked about like hardware, software. It begins to feel like these things that are core to a company. And how does that balance between, because if you're working with somebody outsourcing, whatever word we want to use, that isn't that the, secret sauce isn't the right word in the sense, but like not from that sense, but just from the like, shouldn't the company be doing the design for those things?
Okay, so first question, should the company be designing those things? Yes, companies should be designing the things that they make and put out into the world. And I think that's not, I think that's the first thing that we want everyone to know. Like if I would say it's not going to be very good business, but if I could just wave a wand and have the companies that make things that go out into the world, and by the way, we can talk about it later, but some of the most consequential and impactful things that go out into the world be designed and be properly designed, then I'd say job done and I'd go find another way to make money. The problem is that first problem is not everyone thinks that way. So there's a lot of work that we can do to come in and help them do a better job at what they need to be doing when it comes to design. Um, I will say that's happening less and less today. A lot of companies that we work with want it desperately. So then there's the next problem, which is it's it's very inefficient for a company at different sizes to do this kind of work. The doing the work part probably takes everyone in the exact same amount of time. The work behind the work is finding the best talent in the world, building a team of the best talent in the world for any given thing that needs to be made at any given stage, and then creating an environment where that talent can do the absolute best possible work. That is very rare because it's very hard to do. There are some companies out there who can and do it 100% in-house, and they're very valuable companies. The Hims and Hers, publicly traded company, you can see how well they've done. Airbnb, I mean, Apple, obviously,
Uh,
um, and these companies that I just mentioned do most or all of that work in-house. But even those companies know that A, they know that it's extremely valuable, and B, they know they can't have all of the best talent all of the time, working in all of the best conditions all of the time. And so then you could call it outsourcing. I think the right way to think of it is kind of partnering and bringing that in. But yeah, it,
to your point, there's a very different word between partnering and outsourcing, right? Outsourcing, like I need you to go just do the work, get it done. Partnering, and I would hope, especially as you're getting more and more to the core business, is not something that you're outsourcing because you should be even learning it, embedding it. Like, how do you think about the tension between something that's working with an earlier stage company, where look, there's just a scale issue, right? There's only so many times, and that's one of the times why they go and reach out. But then, how do you make sure that they embed that thinking and that knowledge? It's funny, just thinking about Airbnb and Apple. Some of the people who why design is so core to the company is the history of John Ivey and Joe Gevia, right? They were designers first and foremost coming in, and so that's why it became part of the culture.
yeah, yeah. So, I think that outsourcing is an interesting word. I mean, outsourcing is a very kind of can be a very practical concept.
Uh-huh.
But I think there's also just the outsourcing of the thinking, the outsourcing of the vibe, the outsourcing of talent, outsourcing creativity. And I think that's the challenge. I don't think any person, and maybe we'll talk about this later, but I think, generative AI is like a good way to outsource your creativity. And
Oh, I'm going to push on that.
yeah, I know we'll get there. I figure we would drop that in now, allude to it, but no, I think so. Back to the conversation that we're having now, though, I think there's one way to work with an agency or even a freelancer or anything like that, where you're outsourcing it. I give you a dollar, you give me pixels. Done. There's
Right.
another thing to have someone come in and create a single goal together. Now we'll kind of get in the creative process a little bit. And then it's the creative process and how you handle it as to whether you're outsourcing it or not. You're not outsourcing the creative process. We create a goal. We understand that goal together very clearly. And 8 out of 10 clients don't have that. They think they do, they don't. And that's fine. It's welcome. We help kind of solidify. Out of a goal can essentially come a brief, and then the brief requires exploration and to find solutions to solve that problem. And then those solutions need to be evaluated, and they need to be crafted and put into the world. And so that every pixel, word, line of code, uh, atom that goes into the side of a wall of a thing that we're designing draws back to understand the single goal and the strategy on how to do that goal. There's one way to do this where we can just go do that and then come back and give you the object and you're like, oh, that's a good object, thank you, and then we're done. There's another way where we literally do all that work together. And I think it goes beyond just the we're highly integrated and collaborative, although I'm not mocking those things. Those are real and very important. It goes to kind of getting at the essence of, is the client truly going to value design? Can they understand it enough to adopt it as a core kind of cultural and strategic principle as to why that company is successful? And can they go on that journey with us? If that all can happen, then we're going to be great. And I'm glad to say I'm very surprised that, starting raw materials 2 years ago, almost to the day, at the number of clients we have had and we currently have today that are working with us on that level and the kind of work that it's creating. And I think that's a testament to not outsourcing. Hiring someone like us, and we're not the only ones, but hiring someone like us doesn't have to be outsourcing. I think it's a really good way to put that.
How do you think about, though, and we talked about this when we first talked, like the actual creative process in this versus the parody, like from Silicon Valley, the TV show with the, showing up the pictures and what vibe works for you and the jaguar and the turtle and all that, which, by the way, is a hysterical scene. I'm curious, you having lived in different things, if you cringed or enjoyed that whole sequence.
Oh, I think it's funny, like the whole show. It's There's truth to it, and things end up being good. I think it's a parody of good things and a parody of bad things too. But
Of
yeah,
course.
I think the difference is, it's like, to try to simplify it, it's like the difference is, I like this, I like that, I want this, I want that. I mean, it's not that clients don't do that with us, or even internal teams at companies don't do that, but there's a difference between that and interrogating something, evaluating something together with the client, saying we have on top of the board the goal, we have below that the strategy, and we have three territories that all work. We agree, like, these are three good things that will work because they pass the test of the strategy. Now let's dive into those things and say, why would this thing work better? And similar to how the company is not going to outsource creativity just to us, we're not going to outsource decision making to our client stakeholders. We're going to do both of those things together. And I think that's the bit of a difference there.
I'm going to pull now the Gen AI threat, right? I can't draw a stick figure, like straight up. But Gen AI has given me tools to create visual language that weren't available before to me. And at the same time, I don't think they should either outsourcing, because the people that I've seen who are creative and have either that visual language or have that, they're able to make things 10 times as good as I am, right? And so it is one more tool set, like all of the different design or any of the tools that we have. I wonder, and have you seen this play out, if somebody is using Gen AI to create imagery to then talk to you, so like, okay, like, it's not I like this, but like, I kind of threw this thing together and like, this is the idea. Obviously we could get better, but like actually being able to create, design and visual vibe language that didn't exist before, because obviously you have the very creative and the non-creative, and then you got to meet somewhere in the middle in the worst case scenario.
Yeah. So you said, I think everything I would say, you put a little thread there for me. So I think, first, it's a tool. So just like anything else, I mean, we are there's a brand out there we worked on. It's called Gravta, and uh, we built a generative a tool that a user, and it's good that any marketer, anyone in a company and CEO can use this tool to generate kind of imagery for the brand, and it's generative in a sense. That was on purpose, though. So like, we created a tool that had a purpose. We wanted to communicate with the brand this sense of extremely high level of quality and technology being involved in that. By the way, Gravta is a generative AI based company, tool, and so that had a purpose. We wanted to communicate something, and so there was intention and there was purpose, and we used a tool to help achieve that thing. And then I think the next thing is that then will communicate something to the world. And so if you're using generative AI to cut corners, to get something out there good enough, fast enough, cheap enough, it does the job. Every word I just said is going to be subconsciously and sometimes consciously read by your audience. And so be careful that what, if that's the message you want to send, and I'm not saying it is or isn't. I mean, there's great brands out there. Like I think of Perplexity is a good brand that a lot of their imagery is generative AI, developed imagery. And it makes sense. What is the product?
Right.
You're
It
saying
fits their vibe.
it's their vibe. It's the message they want to send. It's done on purpose. I used a tool to do a job on purpose, and baked into that is the intention and the problem I was solving, and baked into that is the message I want to send. Great. I think that's it. I think the
It's
pitfalls
the
are,
difference between a tool and a crutch. Like the same thing, like everyone's like, oh, well, people are going to cheat in writing and doing all this and then have ChatGPT. Like, as anybody who's is deep into using these AI tools as I am, I'm sure you are, and lots are, and it's a growing number, you can quickly spot when somebody just said, here's my one sentence, there give me this.
yeah,
And it actually drives down my value. Like the amount of pitches that I get for the podcast that are so clearly, please write me a pitch on this for this podcast, and it like everything goes down in my mind. Like I'm like, why would I ever? You didn't spend any energy, you didn't spend any thought, and whether that be pitching, whether that be imagery, like you can just tell when people are using it as a crutch.
yeah. It's the same. It's the same as any other tool. It's the same as hey, Jason, uh, I I really like your podcast. It's very good. Would you please consider me having me on? Here's a whole bunch of information about myself. And it's like, okay, well, you put no effort in. Like you're communicating something to me. You're communicating a level of care. And I think this is not unique to generative AI or any kind of AI or anything else. It just happens to be maybe, you know, orders of magnitude more in accelerating, but it allows people to do things with less care. And you can certainly put just as much care or more care into using that tool as any other tool, and it will show. The world will see it. But I think it's a crutch. It allows people to not design things, and I think a big part of design is care. And I think that it at the very least, at the very worst, it communicates I don't care about you as an audience. At the worst, it puts kind of crap into the world.
Uh-huh.
It's kind of like fast food. I think it's gonna, we call it slop, or AI slop, things like that. I think it's very real. I think the world is in danger of having less and less great things exist in it. And I think that's a problem. So that is a problem that raw materials wants to solve. Back to the why raw materials. I mean, our mission is to see more great things exist in the world, and generative AI is both making that easier and harder. And so that's yeah.
Are we okay? Are we at risk of having more crap in the world? I mean, there is the distribution, the ease, it keeps getting lower. But the example you made on the podcast pit, there are always lazy people out there. Does it
Yeah.
actually do the opposite, where the comparative point, it makes the great shine more because if 85% of the world, whatever the number we're going to use, are being lazy, being that just using it as the crutch, versus those who are using the entire tool set and whatever the tool set we want to say to create great things. It's just so much clearer instantaneously.
Yes. It's a really good thought process. It's something that I've been thinking about, um, because it I have to kind of weigh like what's going to happen more. Uh, I think about what humans' natural tendencies are, and I think about what organizations of people's natural tendencies are, and then I think about the inherent point of business, and that business is where people organize to create the mass of what we have in the world, good or bad. And I think business is set up to I think the whole point of business is efficiency, is to efficiently turn some kind of raw material asset, whether it be sand or a dollar, into something else that is worth more than it costs to put it in. I mean, business, right? Um, so business is always has that efficiency pressure put on it. And so if all the problems you're trying to solve are efficiency problems, which is what the pressure of the business tells you, solve efficiency problems, then I think that we're at risk of having any tool, and we always have been at risk of having any tool, any invention that we have, like plastic and what fast food and whatever, right? Like that lead to really bad places. I think the antidote, the counter to that is humanity, is human, is which I think humanity, or the human aspect, is most expressed and applied through the idea of creativity. Humans can come up with something that is kind of novel and new. It's not an average of all the things that existed before, and even if it is, it's novel in its context, and it's highly appropriate. Like, what is the goal we're trying to solve? Here's something new that didn't exist before that solves that goal. That's invention. That's innovation. That is the counterbalance to the natural tendency of just creating more crap, more efficiency, more efficiently. And so I think the tools will help accelerate both of those. And I don't know, to your question, like which happens more, it's a really great question.
I'll stretch your comment to, I don't think it's business. I think it's the natural drift of organizations. Because I think when you have, it's the whole, I think it's been overused and it's done, like the whole manager mode, founder mode, right? And when you have that kind of, it's essentially the mission driven component of it. Like this is the story. This is the mission. This is what we're doing. I don't care if it's a business, if it's a nonprofit, whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that drives, that's the metric, right? That
Yeah.
drives things forward. What you have with the kind of bureaucratic decay, drift of organizations, is it when it shifts to being, I'd say, less about, as you said, like efficiency in this, but it's the organization for the organization's sake. And that's when it is like, so in business, it is, okay, how do we just increase, if you're 100 years down the line, right? Just increase our financial returns. Like that is the primacy, versus obviously, like if you solve giant problems, the money comes. Like that's always the, I guess, like if you got, you can get very rich by solving, huge problems, right? Same thing with nonprofit. There's so many nonprofits out there that ask questions like, did you solved it. You did it. Why do you still exist?
You exist so you can exist. And I think, yeah,
Yes.
that's a natural tendency of things. Right. No, 100%. Yeah. I think it goes back to also the outsourcing creativity. I think that I like to think that the most creative moment in any business is when the founder, and I'm simplifying, not all businesses start this way, but just over like
Sure.
generalize, was when the founder said things could be better, and there's this thing that doesn't exist yet, and if that thing existed, things would be better. And then you got to run the numbers and it makes sense, like I can take the sand and I can turn it into something, and I can do that efficiently. But anyway, that's the most creative moment, is when that first kind of inclination, like this ought to exist, and then I ought to be the one to do it. I think that's extremely creative moment. And then everything beyond that is an effort to realize that thing that should exist. And then it goes from realizing it to scaling it, producing it, distributing it, commercializing it. And through each of those steps, creativity and the creative kind of essence of that original idea is always under threat. And some people do a great job of maintaining that essence and that personality and that humanity that was in that moment, and do a great job of maintaining that and getting out there. But almost every single company, it inevitably gets to that point where you're talking about, where the organization kind of takes over, the need for existing just to exist, and you better exist 3% better than you existed last quarter, like that becomes the driving factor, not the thing that this thing should exist because it will make things better. I think the more you can stay there, and I think that's a lot of what we help companies do. Early stage companies, we try to really encapsulate that so strongly, try to create this like supernova of that idea very early on, so that it can shine as long as possible. And then for companies more established, legacy companies we're kind of redesigning or designing new products for, we want to go back and kind of dust off the old stuff from the founders in those early days and be like, why does this thing, what are the quirks? Where is the humanity in this? I know it's a big business and you ship 1 million packages a year or whatever. Like, okay, we can, we're smart, we can handle that. But what we really want to know is like, where was the humanity in this? And it's a convenient question to ask when we're doing branding, because everyone assumes branding is human centered and these are not new concepts. But the reason we do that, I think, is more about trying to get to the core creativity that is in every business, which I think is the most valuable thing that a business can have, and what we try to help companies do. So, yeah.
It's the foundational stories that kind of unite all the things. So I worked at Medtronic Diabetes for a little bit a number of years ago, and it was one of the best, at least that division's actually being spun out now, the best connective tissue of a story that I've ever seen at any company that I've been at. Because everybody from the president of the division to the president of Medtronic, down to the person working the line, out in sales, whatever, we were going to build the artificial pancreas and solve diabetes. That you knew that in your core. So in the sense of it, when you look at the products, you're like, okay, so here's the products today. The artificial pancreas kind of looks like this. So you didn't have to see the roadmap, the confidential roadmap. You could be like, yeah, so we got to do this. Like, might be different order in the reality, but that story just resonated even long after the founder had left, because it became so salient. And being able to, that's one of the few times I think that it can't, is there's when the founders leave and the mission hasn't been completed. But you've got enough of, I'm going to use this word in the best way possible. The cult is still there. The mission is still there. We're all in this. This is why we're going to solve this. And being able to just like, either whether you have to dust it off or bring it or just have it embedded in everything.
Yeah. Every company has that, or had, and can have. And that's why I say the creative process is starting with the goal. Very simple. What's the goal? And then if everyone agrees on what the goal is, then all the work can be creative. All the work can be, what is the best way to achieve that goal? What doesn't exist today that should exist to help us achieve that goal? And if you're like, oh, we need to invent a material, or we have the material we need, it's this latex stuff, but it's so expensive that it's cost prohibitive for us. And so there the goal is not met. Okay, well, that's the problem to solve. Go solve that problem. I think it's great. I think there's one of the best people. So, I was kind of like take a lot of the stuff that Johnny Ive talks about it, and like when he communicates his philosophy on one side, and the way that Elon Musk talks about his mission, getting multiplanetary, and kind of combine those things together. I think there is on the one hand, on the Elon Musk side, there is what we're just talking about now. There's the single mission. There's like one thing matters. We're going to do 9 billion. We're going to make 9 billion decisions, but they're all based on one goal happening. And that's so powerful. And that's what you're just saying. On the other hand, with Johnny Ive is all of those 9 billion decisions have an effect, have an impact on the world. And we as a society, as a species, as an advanced species, have the ability to make good decisions that have a positive impact on the world, or we have the ability to outsource those decisions or just phone in those decisions. This little thing here doesn't matter. We can do kind of a shitty job here because this over here is what really matters. That's not the way it works, because everything we exist in a system. And so every little decision you make, all 9 billion decisions about how to get to multiplanetary are just as important as the end goal happening. And I think there's a little bit of a difference that kind of leaving a path of destruction on your way to greatness versus having true and genuine care for why don't we just have nice things around us? We're humans, like we're capable of amazing things. Why don't we? Is it harder? Yeah, like it's the harder path, but we're not here to take the easy path. We're here to just make things great, you know? And so like let's make things great. And I think that kind of combination of those two things is a good way to describe what I think good design is.
Well, and it's interesting because though you mentioned he wasn't the CEO, and so how do you balance that? Like the vision of, because obviously Jobs and Ivy were an amazing team and the things they were able to create and all the people that surrounding that. So is the vision? I mean, do you see someone like Johnny Ives as the vision as the execution? Like obviously I'm oversimplifying like where the design fit in because so much of that came, I think, from Jobs, the outside looking in versus that kind of combination.
Yeah, no, I think Steve Jobs very much was the head of design. You know, I think that every CEO should more or less assume that they have that. Just like anything else, you can find partners and even staff that you trust to have that vision, but you're checking whether that vision and the kind of the value, not even vision, but how do you value design? And you should evaluate that in everyone that you hire. And I think that's a bit different. You know, there's companies that do. Airbnb is probably a good example of that. You know,
Uh,
Apple, that everyone's responsible for design. And so I think Johnny Ive played a role in being a leader, but I don't think that was ever outsourced. I would imagine. I don't know. I wasn't there, but I would imagine that it wasn't outsourced. Like, hey, I'm going to go over here. I'm going to worry about the business, and you're going to go over here and you're going to worry about design. And when the bridge meets in the middle, it's going to be aligned. I don't think that's how that works. How that happens.
no, and it not necessarily in design, but there's an interesting case where you're starting to see the real merge of these types of things that are really converging. I don't remember which company it was. This was recently where they their CTO and their chief people op is now one person because they're asking the question of, okay, can we do XYZ with our technology or an AI agent stack, or do we need people? And they're not separate discussions. It's fundamentally how do we scale the company, and we do it with capital, infrastructure, our people. And so it's the same thing. Like you can't. We've siloed a lot of these different questions, as you said. Like, well, here's the operation, here's the finance, here's the HR, here's the design, and so many of them actually really cross into singular questions.
Yeah, yeah, they do it, and you could do that by creating unifying and creating a single organization. You can do that by creating a flat organizational structure. I think you can also do that by having back to your company is example of having a very strong single and simple goal and mission. And then everything you do, I said in the beginning, every pixel, every word, every dollar, every atomic decision that's made should be able to track back to and be measured more or less to how they help achieve that goal. And then I think you can have an organizational structure. You can maybe even have silos, but at the top of the silo, everything's spilling over to one thing, which is the goal the goal and the mission. And it sounds very simple, and I think it's probably pretty simple in small companies. It gets more and more difficult the larger the company gets, but that's the difference between greatness and just a big company.
When story go gets outside of the company, and so you got the design, you got the things that you're building, but then one, you lose somewhat control of the story, and then Lulu Maservi and her Go Direct manifesto, and all about like the founders and the like we should own the narrative, own the communication. So how do we think about as that design and story hits the other people, like not everyone who's all aligned, and how do we think about one, the kind of the Go Direct mentality, and then also this trade-off between scaling those stories out and then having to rely on those single charismatic founders being like, I'm just getting behind, and they're going to be the voice of the story.
I think that's a decision to make. I think the last thing you just talked about, I think these are all brand decisions. If the brand is, if the decision for the brand and, and by design that the founder and the founder's charisma and ability to communicate the vision is strategically the right thing to do, then you'll have an answer to all of your other questions. If that's the case, then we're going to do this, and we're going to do it by design. We're going to build a platform, and that's going to be a big part of the founders or the CEOs, the founder who's the CEO's job. I think when you try to do that, just when you say, we're a brand that means this and we stand for that, and this is how we do things, and this is our culture, and then really all it is just the founder's voice out there just saying it over and over again. It's going to be very apparent that if that wasn't by design, I think it's going to fall apart. I don't think that you can have. I don't agree that it only has to be one way. I do believe that it's going to be best and most effective whatever way it is that it's done by design. I think that's where I come from.
What do you think about the design, like the plan design versus the emergent story and narrative? And how do you build in for things that you weren't expecting, that resonate, that build? And we can't plan everything. We try, but it's an interesting tension, right? Because you want to say, like, this is first. It's the thing we all learned, like in elementary school: show, not tell. Right? If you're putting up, this is what we're about. These are the things. Like, they don't work, right? It's you feel it, it, you hear the story, you're in or you're not. But then there are certain, especially I think the smaller companies, bigger companies, it's a little more settled. Smaller companies, you just have an emergent nature to it.
Well, I would argue that everything is, right. Like that's what design is. You can't, um, you can't design an experience, right? I think this is like a good way to talk about this. You can't design an experience. You can design for an experience. So you can't, you can lead a horse to water. You can't make him drink, that's kind of the thing. And so if you know that, and that's what you're trying to do, then I think it becomes a lot easier, and you can't literally force users to do something. You can't literally force consumers to buy something. You can create the conditions. You can establish a goal. You can say, what is our best way to make that goal happen? And then within that best way to make that goal happen, what are all the different kind of expressions and ideas and make that thing happen? You put all that together, and then it's all a hypothesis. I think that back to business, I think business is just one big hypothesis. And because you can't literally force
and then experimenting against that hypothesis.
Right, exactly. So that's what that is. I think knowing that going in, your design is creating kind of like experimental conditions, and you believe it's going to happen. That's why we test. That's why we leave the ability to iterate, and we leave open the ability to interpret. So there's like this emergent thing that happens that users and consumers will do. There's also an emergent thing that happens when all of the partners and employees and marketing firms start using the brand or using the design principles, and all the infinite unpredictable things they'll make out of that stuff. So there's almost that like second degree emergent. And I think you're designing for that. I think you're designing for, you kind of experimentally designing for this kind of hypothetical outcome or behavior that you want to create, and you're doing your best, and then you're seeing where it goes. I think that's a really good way to put that. Yeah.
So I think that's a great segue when you say, like, you can't design for an experience, you can't design. There's these emergent properties in this, and then they hit reality. When I think it's taking this out of the company level and bringing it up to like the ecosystem level, there are stories that are coming out of ecosystems. Whether there's a reason everything is Silicon XYZ, because that story of silicon meaning tech, and that's just the moniker that's the word for it, means something. But then we go back, and I've written about this recently, right? And I shared the essay, like that the same thing, the word Renaissance, right? Like we still use that; it still has meaning, 500 years after Florence. And so when I think about the stories of ecosystems, and you put all of these things together, and obviously Austin a lot on my mind in this. One, is that purely emergent, or is this something that we can design?
Oh, it's something we can design. Yeah. I mean, it's something you design and then the emergent thing happens, like we were saying before. But I think the opposite of by design is by accident. And so these things do emerge, but they don't have to emerge by accident. That's where design plays in. And so if it's storytelling, if it's creating a moniker or titling something so you can organize a movement behind it, or titling something and creating a brand for something so that people can feel community and you can get, people can come together to do something. All that's very powerful. And I think that is because just because it's emergent ultimately doesn't mean that it can't be helped to happen, and I think that's what design is it's creating the emergence of things to happen, but on purpose.
So then, when we think about it, like the city level ecosystem, like there's like the worst crass form of like just not crass, like it's the pure marketing of it. Like this is great, this is one, come like all the kind of the tourist board thing. Not that I'm trying to knock the tourist boards, but like it's a very straightforward, right? Versus the when you really, and I started to use this word a lot more, when you really think about the things that really crack through, it almost becomes like myth. It's that level of the idea of like Prometheus coming down and giving fire, right? Or that level of epicness and mythology that surrounds the cities. Like, oh, the grit and grime of New York, and you get there, you can make it anywhere. Like those kinds of ideas that just permeate our subconscious. And when I think about to your point, design is not, it's just intentionality versus accident. The Who then owns who's the ones with the intention to try to either trying to create those stories or just building the stories out, right? Like as I said, if it's not marketing, but it's just we're telling a story.
Well, sometimes it happens. I mean, it's like cities are a good example of that. I know they're just an example, but it's happened in companies too, um, where it just emerges out of culture. It's the thing that people talk about. Usually there's someone who says something to keep Austin weird, that someone says something and they didn't say it so that that would be on every t-shirt in the airport 50 years later. I don't think that, obviously that wasn't why they said it. And then the culture decided, oh, that thing you just said, I'm going to say that too. And then I'm going to say that too. That's cool. And now we are today, probably completely, I don't want to say misinterpreting it, but a new interpretation of that has emerged naturally, and someone said it. And so I would argue that that is by accident. Not all accidents are bad. And I don't know if that's good or bad, but they keep Austin a weird thing. But not all accidents are bad, but they are accidents. And I think that
It's funny. Keep Austin Weird was a marketing slogan done by either like the chamber or somebody of that nature. It was really a pushback. What it really meant was keep Austin local, because it was a fight against. There's a great I listened to ATX Explained that talked about like it was really about all these large chain brands were moving in, and this was the pushback to it. And to your point on it meant something in civic pride of like we pride in our local businesses in many ways. Now to your point, I feel like it's evolved now to be almost a anti-change slur. Like, oh, we're killing Austin, keep Austin weird. I'm like, it's still weird. It's still different. It's still something new, but it's
yeah,
changing. Like it changed since Waterloo, back in the
yeah,
1800s.
yeah, yeah. And that's part of the emergent thing that you're talking about. I think that's and that emergent thing that where things ideas change over time, and you can't really control how you can try. You can put a levee up here and there, but at the end of the day, like, water's going to do what water's going to do.
Mm.
And I think that back to whether it be business or nonprofits, I mean, anyone that's in, people are organizing with the intention to create a different state than it is now. Um, you you have to go back to the most like to that creative moment and say, this is what I want to happen, and I'm going to make this thing or this service, or I'm going to make these changes, I'm going to lobby for this to happen, whatever it is, I'm going to take these actions or make this thing, and I want it to happen. I think that's where you can draw that line and say, from now until forever, regardless of what emergent properties happen or how culture reacts or this thing changes or evolves over time, that one thing's always going to be true. And I think that's when we talk about branding or comms or storytelling, trying to tell a story that's foreign to that core idea is always going to just lead things in a weird, I mean, at best, it's going to be forgotten about. At worst, it's going to change the course and take you off course.
I didn't think about like the language. We often go back to Joseph Campbell's like hero's journey. It's all the same structure, but from a either visual or written language, do we need to be tapping back? I don't care if it's at the ecosystem level or into like familiar images versus creating a new language. Again, whether it be visual or not. I mean, I think about like Anduril's all their videos have got that kind of like 80s anime, and maybe they write some like vibe. Like at this point, like it harkens back. But now at this point, if I see it, I know it, right? Like they created their own ownership around that language.
I think it's definitely helpful to I mean, especially in the world, I don't think this is only for the world of storytelling. I think this is design in general. You can't, you can't solve, you can't be better without being different. And so you can't create an outcome that's better without that outcome being different. And you can't solve problems in any better way without solving them in a different way. But different doesn't have to mean, and I don't know if today it's even possible to be completely and absolutely novel in every sense of the form of the way. So I think everything is familiar to some extent. Um, but I think it's the usage of it, both in where it's showing up. It's very novel for a defense technology company, kind of on its way to becoming a prime, uh, to use anime in this kind of flashing image and even a bit of humor in their marketing. Has no one, have companies done that before? Of course, but has a defense technology company done that before? Has, that put themselves in Southern California? These things come together to become a very, very novel situation, just comprised of things that may not be so novel in other contexts. And then the second thing is the what's novel or becomes more proprietary, I guess, is the craft and the execution of that, which is part of what you recognize. You recognize, oh, I think you could possibly mistakenly recognize if, and I'll say when, another defense technology company uses that same kind of look, that same kind of idea, that same kind of anime thing, because they're going to copy. They are. It's shortcuts. They're going to shortcut and copy.
Wow.
I'm being a little we got a negative now because I think we got to be negative to be positive. But they are. But I think you will always definitely recognize the craft that's applied. And I know the design team over there, and they care. They fight for craft and care. I don't think they have to fight hard because the founders also understand this stuff. And so there's a recognizability and identifiability that comes with the novel use of that at all. And then the way that they used it, the craft that went into it, I think you can't really separate those two. I think they're both very important to exist, and why. And I think both of those are novel in their own way.
Well, back to our further point about the crutch versus the tool that then separates out. Like if another defense company, one, you're right. Like obviously others have used that type of imagery, and even the imagery in and of itself harkens back. Like it has a vibe, it has a memory to it. But if another defense company goes and does that, like it's become so embedded into Anduril's like brand and vibe and just being, it'll feel like a shortcut. It'll in and of itself, it'll say like, okay, you're doing this to copy them. What is that? What is the story you're telling me about everything from the images you produce to the actual products you produce?
100%. That's it. That's simple. That's the case. That's the pitch, and it's not even a pitch. It's just fact. And it's just human behavior, and it's just truth, and it's the easiest way is to say, why did you do that? And if you had a reason, some products need, we needed vaccines for an epidemic. Why don't we just, we don't have to over design every detail of the box and how these things go in like you would a charger for an iPhone. But you better think that hard about the things that are important, and I think like you should think about the message that sends. They didn't send that stuff out in a ugly little cardboard box that no one gave a shit about. Like that stuff, all these things send messages. And I think that's it. I think that's pretty much the simple explanation and case for design.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to end. So I always want to end with the same question. We didn't really get into so much about the fact you guys are always here and doing work for different companies around Austin and beyond. But John, the same question I ask everybody: what's next, Austin?
Yeah, it's a good question. What I would love to see Austin continue to lean into more, even more than having an identity, or even more than having a crafted kind of a brand and community around things, is that Austin is incredibly rich. And I mean that in every sense of there's a lot of money in Austin. There's a lot of talent in Austin. There's a lot of space and room in Austin and in Texas. There are people who made a lot of money in the internet era that are in Austin, who are wanting to invest in doing big things that'll change the world. And so I think that what's next for Austin is to use the resources that Austin has to go and make big things of big consequence that'll change the world, and do it by design.
Love it. John, thanks for joining the show.
Thank you.
So what's next, Austin? We're glad you've joined us on this journey. Please subscribe at your favorite podcast catcher, leave us a review, and let your colleagues know about us. This will help us grow the podcast and continue bringing you unique interviews and insights. Thanks again for listening, and see you soon.